folks, and welcome to another episode of 81632-bit. Today I'm looking at the 3DO, as you gathered by the video title and thumbnail, and I'm going to say why I think the 3DO deserved a lot better than it got. Now, quick history lesson. In the early 1990s, the 16-bit wars, as it were in full swing. Sega and Nintendo were duking it out across most of the world, and for the most part, outside of Japan, it was a fairly even fight, with Sega's 16-bit machine being seen as a little bit more edgy and grown up compared to Nintendo's family-friendly offering. Now, waiting in the wings was a former Electronic Arts executive by the name of Trip Hawkins. He saw the future of video games, and he felt that that future was CD-ROM technology. It just so happened that he was right in that optical media would be the future over cartridges, but his vision was for an open standard that could be licensed by manufacturers, which in theory would give the platform a wider reach than anything Sega or Nintendo could produce. Now, this open standard had been tried before with a relative degree of success, certainly in the Far East and some parts of Europe, with the MSX standard, which saw a bunch of same-spec 8-bit microcomputers based around a Z80 CPU released by a number of manufacturers such as Sony, Philips, etc. Actually, I'm not sure about Philips, but never mind. But certainly Sony were the main one that people recognised. And they did quite well for themselves with the open MSX standard, with Microsoft on board. Now, Trip Hawkins and his freshly named 3DO company set about creating a multimedia version of this for the 32-bit CD-ROM era. So they developed the 3DO platform. Now, initially, this was licensed by companies including Panasonic, Gold Star, and there were others that were rumoured to be coming on board. Now, most people are familiar with the Panasonic machines, especially the FZ1, which is the iconic original 3DO that you've seen on screen already. Now, the standard was fairly powerful for the time, however, they couldn't know what Nintendo, Sega and Sony were cooking up in the background. However, they pushed ahead with the 3DO concept and it launched. And it wasn't a big hit, to be fair. It was expensive. There were no real killer apps that you would say out of the gate. Yet, as a hardware platform, it never really fulfilled its potential. And there were a number of reasons for that, not least of course being the cost. Now, let's just look at this sensibly here. The system was an open platform, so anybody could license it from the 3DO company and produce a piece of hardware. Now, obviously they did have to pay licensing fees for that, and unlike being a platform owner such as Nintendo or Sega producing their own hardware, nobody for the 3DO who was manufacturing the systems to play the games on could levy a fee from developers. You see, one of the key reasons Nintendo and Sega, and going forward Microsoft and Sony, would do so well with their hardware sales was they could afford to sell the hardware at relatively low prices, even taking a loss in the early years of a machine's appearance on the market, because they were getting a cut of every piece of software sold through licensing deals. Now, this was something that you couldn't do with the 3DO. Panasonic couldn't charge Electronic Arts or Ubisoft or Ocean or any of the other software companies at the time a fee to produce a game for the 3DO, because they didn't own the 3DO. That was the 3DO company, and I believe there was a small licensing fee that they charged, but whatever licensing fee was charged went into the 3DO company's pockets, not the hardware manufacturers. So there was no way of subsidising the hardware, hence when it released it had an eye-watering $799 or £799 price tag. Now, to put that in context, in sort of 1993, 1994, you could pick up a Mega Drive or a Super Nintendo for somewhere in the region of about $130, £130. It was literally 7 times the price. And even with Sega, even if you included a Mega CD into your budget, you were still paying a massive amount less than you would for a 3DO, roughly half the price in fact. Now, this certainly harmed the system's prospects. In fact, it harmed them greatly. The system ultimately only sold approximately 1 million units worldwide. But I think it did deserve better. You see, despite the high price, it was a premium piece of hardware for the time. It did things that no other machine on the market could do. It did texture mapped polygons for starters. This was a big thing. Previously, if you had a polygon game on a console, it was something like either Star Fox or ultimately Sega's Virtua Racing. There were a few other games. EA certainly put out a few of its PC and home computer flight sims on the Mega Drive. There were versions of hard driving and race driving, but they were basic flat shaded polygons, often running at incredibly low frame rates, sometimes even in the single digits. You took the 3DO, you had games like Need for Speed, Road Rash. These games looked insanely good compared to the competition. Even if the frame rate wasn't always the best, Need for Speed itself rarely gets above 20 frames per second, although Road Rash does fly along at a pretty good pace and is probably the killer app for the system. Now, you look at that and you think these are first generation software titles, and some of these first generation software titles do look really good. Like I said, Road Rash looks outstanding, Need for Speed looks incredibly good. There are other titles out there as well, such as Shockwave, which have really good graphics, and you kind of think, had the system been on the market for another couple of years, what could developers have done with it? Because there's clearly a lot of untapped potential there. You can see that these days in the way that fans of the system have been reworking the version of Doom that was released for the 3DO to improve its performance, and they've made massive improvements to not only the performance but also the game's visual presentation. So clearly, developers of first generation software, like on pretty much any system, were leaving a lot of performance on the table simply because they didn't know what they were doing with the hardware effectively at the time. And of course there's the price. It's the elephant in the room. Had the 3DO been on the market at say $400, $450, putting it roughly in line with the price of buying a Mega Drive and a Mega CD, it might have done better. Had they been able to get it out for even less, it almost certainly would have done better, but that would have required either the 3DO company passing on some kind of subsidy from software fees, which didn't have to be charged, it must be said. You could release a game for the 3DO without a license to the hardware developers, or 3DO themselves manufacturing the hardware and releasing it under their own branding, thus being able to follow the whole market technique that Nintendo and Sega did. It's open platforms are a wonderful idea. I love them as a concept, but commercially, unless there is a major way of subsidising the production costs, you're always going to have something which is more expensive than a purely in-house product. And it's a shame. The 3DO was the first proper 32-bit CD-ROM based system to hit the market. It had some good games, but ultimately it was doomed to fail by the business decisions that its founders felt would actually set it up for a solid run in the market. Anyway, that's enough of me rambling on about the 3DO for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. Feel free to leave comments. Quite a few of you did on the previous video about the video game crash of the 80s being a myth. It It's great to read those comments. It always helps stimulate debate and gives me idea for future content. Now, if you've enjoyed this video, do hit like and subscribe. If you really liked it and you like and subscribe, ring the bell to be notified of new uploads. You can also support me on my Ko-fi page or my newly launched Patreon page. The links will be in the description below. And this is Rob saying so long, and I will see you on the next video.